Hey everybody, welcome back to another crash course video where we'll just very quickly go over how I build certain types of decks without getting too deep into it. Today we're gonna take a look at another Redfor mix deck, but one that I think is maybe even the most interesting one, because I think it is not as, well, if I were a hater I would call it brain dead, but not as straightforward and more interesting because it has clear weaknesses, and while it's certainly not nearly as competitive, sometimes that just can make a deck more fun, at least for me. Although you could always argue that, well, losing isn't fun, and you will lose more with this, probably. In any case, I quite like this deck. I think it's very fun. Not the most meta deck, but you don't always have to try hard, right? That said, let's get into it. Logistics. You don't get any IFVs in Marines, really. You don't even get the BMP1, anything like that, at least not in Blue 4. You get some tank CVs in the form of T55s, but they're not the best tank CVs. So this is one of the few decks where I actually do run a Jeep CV. I still am not a big fan of them, but given the fact that you also only have 45 activation points, you can't really afford to run 5 cards in the logistics tab. And that's why I run this one. At least compared to the other Jeeps, it has by far the highest off-road speed. I think at the moment, no vehicle has this much off-road speed. But in the upcoming South Africa DLC, as Eugene has shown, or said rather, I believe some of the vehicles will reach that speed as well off-road, some of the wheeled tanks. But that's another story. So CV's done. Unfortunately, ground-based logistics only up to 15 points, nothing higher. So it's really up to you. Just don't use this one because this is objectively a worse 15 points applied drugs because it actually turns slower than the other ones. For the sake of it, let's take it the Chinese one. And you don't have to, but I would recommend running a fob. You can also run 2 cards of supply trucks, but there is an artillery piece, so just 1 card of supply truck and no fob and no second card, I would not recommend. Unless you don't run that artillery piece. Infantry tab, there are some nice choices. FJB and MA24D are always very, very comfy, very nice to have. But 7 infantry slots isn't actually a lot, given the fact that, you don't have... They need to fill more roles than they would need in unspec decks, right? So these 7 slots are incredibly valuable. That said, at the moment I can't really fit them in, but they are a good choice. What I do run, however, is for getting my rocket pod helicopter fix, I run a card of Moskaya Perota 90s and the K29. K29, while expensive, has 1 front, side, and rear armor. So infantry without man pads are gonna have a very hard time getting rid of this. Lots of rocket pods, 10 HP, reasonably fast. And while the Moskaya aren't amazing, they're still an okay infantry squad. Not groundbreaking, but they're gonna be fine. For my heavy AT, Raniko Yakari 90. You don't really have a lot of choices when it comes to heavy anti-tank. You get Yaki on day 90, but they're just not particularly good. Carbine is nice to have, but the AT weapon is not very consistent, only 10 RPM as opposed to 20 here. And the MG it's just a basic MG, so that's all you get. And I think that's really the only heavy AT you get. You get Lucian on day 90, which I also actually run in the Sadist 90, just as some kind of mid-tier kind of combination. Again, they themselves aren't amazing, but given the fact that you get extra veterancy, that's nice. The Sadist 90 is actually amazing. And it's just a nice combination. You get IFV, you get anti-IFV, you get infantry support, and a solid all-round infantry squad. It's an all-round combination, just a bit bolstered by the fact that you get extra veterancy. Next up, your main infantry, or my main infantry here is, because if you may have noticed, you don't really get any line infantry, right? If you take a look at just rifle, everything you get is shocks. So that's why I just run 2 cards of Mordschützen. You can run them upvetted, and the difference between veteran and elite is noticeable. But personally, 2 cards of upvetted Mordschützen, I always run out of them actually. That said, if you want, you can of course also run 3 cards, or even 3 downvetted. Not in an SPW 70 for one, because the transport costs just as much as the infantry itself, 10 points more expensive. And for wheel stuff, you have Veranikos. Next up, I'm going to use what's the name? Raska Sinkorime or something. Yep, them. Just decent ridiculous rifle squads, very similar to the Tanke Shasho 85, which are prototype, however. 16 AP, decent range. Coming a veteran, of course, bolsters their accuracy. The primary weapon is pretty horrible. I think that rate of fire is militia rate of fire actually, so that's a bit but you don't care about this anyway with this. They're just very nice to hold defensive positions against IFV spam and stuff. They're not mandatory, but I just like putting them in. And then last but not least, ATGM squad. This time around, I will actually definitely recommend using the Conqueror's M, because you need that high AP, because you have no heavy tanks or medium tanks really to speak of, so you need that punch. And of course, you could also just replace them with, like, you know, Factorias, and then you have the cheap ATGM spam with the Factorias and the high-end one with the Conqueror's M, also very viable. Man pads you don't really need, and I think are very hard to fit in actually. Lijan, you could run a card of Lijan, they come on a lead by default, so you don't have to upvet them, but I think they're just very hard to fit in, and your infantry with Mortism are already pretty efficient at killing enemy infantry. I think that's really all the interesting choices here. Support, you do get Osas are always fine. You also get a HQ61, not to be underestimated. I'm actually just gonna run a card of Eto90s, very good all round, and a card of PGC80s. It's a bit light, but you have to keep in mind you get some more ASFs and again veterancy, or some more plane slots and again extra veterancy. It can be a bit light, however. Of course, you could also just run the HQ7 if you prefer that over the Eto90. And like I said, the OSA lines generally very, very good. You get a very good mortar, the best Redfor mortar, and then you get the Chinese BM24, a very good artillery piece. You do not get the Jurgen, so this is really by far the best artillery piece you have access to, and a very good one at that. Tanks, not too much to choose from. I think no tank has full range in the tank tab. All of them have 2100 or less. All I put in here is a card of charioteers, because your actual main tanks come in the recon tab in the form of the PMPSV. 2 cards of these are, I would say, mandatory. They're just ridiculously good recon tanks. As in the previous deck, I just like having a recon helicopter. And then for my recon infantry, again, just a card of Liren. You do get some elites, get the VMFs, of course. You get, well, all of the 2-man squads and as well as Formosa. But I think there's, you know, Liren are just the best compromise, really. Vehicle type, only really something in there because otherwise you'd have 1 activation point left. And in this case, I'm putting in the Hellcat just because it's very cheap and it's a very good off-road speed. Other good choices would be, yeah, no. There are no real amazing choices here. None of this is really groundbreaking. Some people actually like spamming these Jeeps with ATGMs. The Conqueror's M ATGMs Jeeps can also be okay. Flame tanks, some people like flame tanks. This choice is not that relevant, really. You don't really have much good things to choose from. Same with the helicopter type. At least you get, you know, one good choice, and that's the MR25. These are both pretty horrific. Like, horrible, I should say. But the MR25 is fine. Planes, you get actually just enough good planes to fill the air tab. You don't have a lot to choose from, but you know, if you look at this, MiG-29 is fine, and the extra veterancy making it common veteran really helps. Polish MiG-29 comes on a lead instead of veteran now, also really helps. You get B5 that you can also use 2 cards from. I'm at the moment running only 1 card, but it's really up to you. The Syria is your only really good ATGM plane, but also I'm still running the East German one just to have a backup, because the Syria, as good as it is not particularly survivable, and you really rely on them to kill super heavies, because ground game wise you don't have a lot of things to do with them. Seed, the only one that you have access to. I don't understand why this SC-22 is available, but not the East German Seed one or the Polish Seed one, because they're still SC-22 M4s, just P versions, which I assume has to do something with their seed capabilities. And last but not least, I'm actually running the 24M. Again, you can also run the P5 instead, or the AVA-28, which is also 2 per card, but this one just because it's fast, as opposed to the B5. But yeah, not too many other good choices left, right? This is pretty horrible. These I mentioned, right? F6C is pretty horrible. This is actually not all too bad, believe it or not. But I will still not recommend using it. Not a particularly good Helo Hunter. Q5s, they're not amazing. S27 SK is actually kind of okay now because you get it on lead, but of course 50% accuracy on the missiles instead of 60 on these, right? And then the SE7BM is pretty garbage, and the Yak 38s. While the Yak 38M has actually a very good payload for its price, it's just incredibly slow, bad time over target, and low ECM. So yeah, the only other planes that you should really consider like replacing something with is the AVR-28 and the second card of B5. But yeah, that's this deck. A bit low on AA, so you might want to think if you like it that way. For team games, it should probably be enough. You can rely on team games, and ASAs become more important, or like more easy to buy, or easier to buy. But you know, I can understand if you think this is light, but I just, funnily enough, never really had many issues with this AA setup. But a really fun deck. Again, not like the strongest deck, but they don't have to be fun. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it, hope you learned something, and I'll hopefully see you next time. Later!